The History Things podcast is brought to you by TR Historical, your one-stop shop for all your historical fan gear needs. Visit trhistorical.com and use the promo code HISTORYTHINGS to receive 10% off your next purchase. Thanks for listening. Now let's start the show.
Are you ready?
Welcome back, everyone, to the History Things podcast, sponsored by TR Historical, your one-stop shop for all your historical fan gear needs. Go to trhistorical.com. Use the promo code HISTORYTHINGS. Get 10% off your next purchase. Make sure you tell Dave that Matt and Pat from the History Things podcast sent you. I am your host, Pat McGuire. Joining me today, as always, is your co-host, my co-host, rather, with the most. You know him, you love him. Author, historian, park ranger. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. Matt Borders, Matty B. How you doing, big guy?
Hell of an intro there, bud.
Yeah, I'm feeling it today.
I can tell.
I was pumped.
So it's always good to be back, and we've got a follow-up episode.
That I'm pumped about.
Obviously.
Oh, the jokes never get old. Yeah, we're in Q2 follow-up time. But, I don't know if we can keep calling them follow-ups because we've been using our follow-ups for more like extensions.
That's true.
So just, you call it what you will. We're calling them follow-ups for now. But today we're getting into an extension of our quarter two story. So back on April 1st, you all joined us to listen in for the shot heard round the world.
That's right.
Curator of the Concord Museum up there, David Wood, joined us. He took us through the events leading up to and through the day on April 19, 1775, where the British famously came to capture munitions and weapons. The militias formed and stood them down, the tavern on the green, all that kind of stuff. The forming on the green. Tavern on the Green, I think, is a restaurant in New York City, actually. Shout out. Dope-ass restaurant. But, David took us through this amazing story that built up to the first shots of what becomes the American Revolution. I was pumped because it was our first real big dive into the American Revolution as a whole. We had Marie Williams on the show, who talked about the focus look up in the Adirondack region,
correct?
Which we were very excited about. But now we took we shot up into the sky and we took a more 30,000 foot view of sort of the opening salvo. Oh, that's a terrible reference, but the opening moments of what become the United States of America as a country. So we're very excited to be joined by Mr. Wood again, who joins us today from the Concord Museum. David, when we last left you here, we had just sort of wrapped up the British sort of banking into Charlestown to get out of this sort of running battle, right? So just to refresh our listeners real fast, the British are sent to seize weapons and things like that, and ammunition that had been stored in Concord. This is April 19th, 1775. Militia companies are going to sort of form up, stand them down at the battles of Lexington and Concord. As the British move back towards Boston, more militia from all over the region start to show up, not just surrounding the area, but like from a little further away are starting to show up. And that's where we left it, right? The British were taking so much fire, so many heavy casualties that they just got to get out of there. So they bank into Charlestown. So my first question to you before we get into what becomes the siege of Boston is, what are the numbers on militia at this point? At first it's sort of just the local guys that are coming to reinforce this scene, but then we start to see, militia from some of the other New England colonies initially showing up as the word, we talked about that signal spreading, spreads down further south to colonies like where Matt and I are at in Maryland and all that. So what are the initial numbers and what are the initial sort of reinforcement numbers, just to refresh our listeners as we get to the British being in Charlestown?
Right. Well, the first column was about 800, 700 or 800. And then that's relieved by Percy's column, which may have been as many as 1,000. And over the course of the day on the provincial side, that number is changing constantly. You know, it's pretty steady for the regulars, 700, 800 until Percy joins, then they're 1,800, something like that. But if you you just think there's maybe 60 on the common at Lexington. There's maybe 450 at the North Bridge. These are provincial, and then that number just keeps going up. But even by noon or so around Merriam's Corner, 700, 1,000 provincials. It's kind of hard to tell because they're, the nearby towns, Bedford joined in there, some even more distant towns, Framingham joined in just a little later. The numbers constantly going up, and this is the encircling fire around the returning column of regulars, continually reinforced. Must have been scary. So they're, by the time, end of the day, 7 o'clock in Charlestown, maybe 2 to 1 regular or provincials, something like that.
Wow.
There might have been 3,000, 3,500 around. And then that number continues to go up. As you said, the alarm is spreading out, still going about 7 miles an hour. I forget when it gets to Maryland, but it's a shockingly short time.
Sure.
But we're not seeing any other colonies except, now and again there happens to be somebody around. And the western towns haven't yet arrived, and so on. That's over the next couple of days. But within 4 or 5 days, there may have been 20 to 30,000 provincial troops surrounding Boston.
Holy moly!
And at that point, they're coming from all over Massachusetts. They're coming from New Hampshire. They're coming from Connecticut. Large contingent from Connecticut. So these are distinctively impressive numbers. And again, it's as Gage says. This is not an accident. You can't get this many people together that fast without planning ahead. And I dare say Gage was right.
Gage was probably also furious, just for the record, because Gage liked order, and this is not going well.
It was not good. Not good.
David, when the provincial forces, these militia forces, begin to show up in such numbers around Boston, what sort of organization do they have for besieging Boston? Is anybody kind of taking charge, or is it everybody out on their own hook and crook?
No. It is organized and it's centralized around the Committee of Safety, Committee of Supplies. They're working together, very closely. But let's say it's Committee of Safety's in the driver's seat, and that's a committee of the Provincial Congress. Provincial Congress continues to meet hourly, through this period. They're keeping an eye on what's going on. So it's called investment when you surround a town like this militarily. So that right. Investment there's a fog. There's definitely a fog around command and control. It's hard to read, but there were no slip-ups, no big gaffes. Everybody held their line and so on. And then within a month or so, you do see some real organization. Then you can start seeing who's in charge. Joseph Warren is emerging as a really important leader in the field. And like that. And Provincial Congress, begins making plans for what's next. And their target is Charlestown. The thing you want to do when you invest a city, Julius Caesar can tell you this in his Gallic Wars, take the hills. Take the hills all around it. And that's what the provincials set out to do.
All right. So let's get into it then. So, we focused in the first episode on a lot of buildup to, basically a day, one single day, April 19, 1775. That day ends with, we've said, the beginnings of what becomes the siege of Boston. So for our listeners out there, simple question: how long does this siege last?
It's until March 17th of 1776. So
just shy of a year.
Wow.
Yeah, 1 month short of a year. Yeah.
All right. So the military situation is there's a provincial force that is outnumbering the British at this point. But the British aren't completely cut off. They're cut off from the land right now, but the port's open still, right? So they're getting. Can you tell us about sort of just their ability to stay reinforced before we sort of, because it's a siege situation. For those out there who are unfamiliar, there's a lot of watching and not happening and bleeding of supplies. It's not always hot fighting and things. So what's the situation with the port being open? This is a huge lifeline for the British.
Yeah. And the supplies aren't immediate. There are no transports coming in. This is part of what Admiral Graves is doing is hustling to get this stuff together. It's not happening yet. As I said, the provincials are seizing the hills around. They're also seizing supplies. There are the islands, the Boston Harbor Islands, and they're all growing stuff, and they have sheep on them, they have cattle, they have pigs, and the provincials make an effort to capture those supplies, and they're enjoying a good amount of success. And the regulars are doing the same thing. They're trying to get the hay, straw. Unbelievable how important straw is as a material. You'll see the provincial Congress making plans for straw, making plans for not allowing the regulars to have straw way back before April 19th. So straw, that really important.
You wouldn't even think.
Yeah. Yep. Really mattered. So that's what's going on. Hay for the horses, straw for their bedding, cattle, sheep. They're killed on the islands, and then the carcass is shipped back to the mainland, or by whatever means. So there are several of those. Some of them almost rise to the level of battle-like conflict. There were some small vessels captured by the provincials, but small, British vessels captured, and so on. So that's what's going on. And there are kind of pot shots being fired. Depending if we're talking about May, June, let's say May, because the big change that happens in June is Washington arrives to take command of the troops. So this again, here's that fog. You've got all these militia companies, and at first they're Middlesex County, Essex County, Suffolk County, and then they're Worcester County, they're Hampshire County. They're the Western guys are coming in, New Hampshire guys are coming in. You can no longer think of this as the Massachusetts Army, which the provincial Congress had made provision for with their rules and regulations. Here's your command and control. You've got militia companies from 30 different communities. They all have their own command structures, their own captains, and so on. It comes down to who salutes who. It kind of comes down to that. And that's what the rules and regs are about, is to sort that out. But for Massachusetts Army, but just at this period, they're beginning to think of this as the New England Army, because you have to include Connecticut, you have to include New Hampshire, Rhode Island eventually. So, that's kind of what's going on. This is forming up. And then, and you look at what the provincial Congress is concerning themselves with. They're concerned with officering this army. So they are appointing officers. And this is a multi-step process. And, that's what they're doing with their working days is they're providing the armies for this army. They're providing the officers, and they're also looking at what's being shipped out of Boston. They don't want they don't want things to be shipped to the islands, and then that money comes back to the British. So they're looking carefully at what's being shipped out. You can ship out year-old fish. That's allowed.
Make a lot of money, guys, off your stinky fish.
But pretty much everything else, no, you can't ship it out. And that goes from both. And Gage has imposed military rule in Boston. The first day or two, few people can get out. There's no carriages to get. It comes down to that. I can't get a carriage. I can't carry my stuff out. You look at Sarah Deming's journal, and here's someone who's caught in this thing and trying to get out, and Sarah can't eat for a couple of days. It's so awful, and so you're just sick all the time and terrified. And how do I get out of here? And Sarah Deming got a carriage. Price of supplies is going up. Price of food is going up. There's another journal that documents that. It's astonishing how quickly those numbers. But this is siege. This is what it comes down to. So that's what's going on in this first month or two. And then, as I said, but there's still activity going on at the Continental Congress in Philadelphia. A day or two after this thing, John Adams rode the road. He went out and toured the battle road, looked around, and said to his journal, actually, this is it. This is it. And he basically just spurred on to Philadelphia. And
so Adams is out there seeing the dead. You said the days. Yeah. So he's riding. So he's looking around and seeing British dead and provincial dead and
not the provincials. The provincials.
Yeah, they're being buried. Yeah.
Sorry. But British dead. Never right. You're right. But he's seeing. So he's physically seeing it. I just want to make that clear because you don't really get that image all too often. Famously, we get Lincoln in the Civil War amongst the ruins of Richmond, but very seldomly amongst outright battlefields. This is a cool moment. This is, John, you said John Adams, right?
Yeah. All right. So he spurs on to Philadelphia. Revere, one of his first assignments is tell Philadelphia. He's there inside of 3 days, I think, inside of 3 days. Try that sometime on a horse. So that's going on. They're in correspondence with the provincial Congress, and things are moving there. So there is organization now on you could say on a national level. All the colonies are involved, essentially in what's going on in Philadelphia. And Philadelphia determines to send a commander to take overall control. And that's George Washington.
David, you'd hinted our first time speaking that the choice of Washington was because this is becoming a national event and is a way to bring Virginia and maybe even some of the other southern colonies on board with this. Is that the mindset?
Got to be. I can't say that's my area of expertise, but Washington. Well, I'll give you some indication of why Washington. So the provincial Congress finds out that Washington's coming to take command of the troops, and they spend their precious meeting hours figuring out how to properly greet this grandee. Washington is already bigger than life. In 1775, and this comes from his service during the Braddock campaigns in the 1750s. Known quantity, a gentleman, and just a grandee, and that is absolutely acknowledged in the provincial Congress. How you greet this individual matters. So they arranged for the delegations that are going to meet him and escort him in. This is big deal stuff, and they all know it. That's what astonishes me. We all know. Well, of course, Washington is great. Well, in 1775, who knows Washington? Well, they all do.
Everybody.
Yeah. And that's amazing. And, so if you've seen the monument on the Common in Cambridge, I just saw it about an hour ago, and it's impressive. But then you look at the way they felt about it at the moment, and that's the way they felt about it. This is a big deal. And it turned out to be. And he was the right guy for the job. And there's some other stuff going on. As I said, Washington's already got a reputation. Benedict Arnold either has or acquires a huge, again, bigger than life reputation within weeks. So he's come up from Connecticut. He's in Boston by end of April. By May, he's got a commission in the Massachusetts Army, and he's on his way to Fort Ticonderoga because he came with the bright idea that the guns are at Fort Ty and they are not being defended. He's not the only one with that idea. Ethan Allen had the same idea in Vermont, actually got there first, Vermont being that much closer.
Henry Knox moves those guns, doesn't he? Isn't it Henry Knox that moves those guns?
Eventually, but it takes a while. But immediately, the idea was, let's get these to Boston. Who's in command there? Is it Allen? Is it Arnold? These are both very large egos. They're not getting along that well, and they're away from command and control. It takes a week for any message to get back to your superiors, and so. That's what's going on there. It delayed things. It took a while for those to get out. It was actually Knox approaching. So, after Washington's in Cambridge, he is in command of the Army. There's recruitment now into the Army, into the Continental Army, no longer, just signing up, showing up, that sort of thing. It's more and more structured, more and more formulaic, formal. But this, in the beginning, it's all just like chaos. And if you read what's going on in the western part of Massachusetts, the journals of Ebenezer Parkman from Marlborough, wonderful, because you can see within 3 or 4 hours, they know about Lexington. And then here come the Groton guys. They're coming through. And then here come people from further west, from Franklin County. They're coming through Marlborough. And the minister, that Ebenezer is a minister, he's addressing them. I mean, that's what you do. You see the minister has to carry on day to day. People are dying. He has to be there, his pastoral care. He's also responsible in a pastoral way for these soldiers, and camp fever shows up within weeks, and there's dysentery everywhere, and there's rumor of smallpox, and there's rumor of smallpox in Boston. This is one of Hannah Deming's concerns. There's smallpox here, so it's not good.
Burn everything to the ground. There's smallpox around. You can't kill it. Just burn it.
Yeah, I mean it's awful, but the thing is, the people who are participating are really intensely aware of it. It's just amazing to read these accounts. These are people writing in haste, fleeing in fear. But they did us the great favor of jotting down the notes.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the logistics behind this operation is amazing. Not only the organization, but keeping this many people fed and watered and healthy. Something that Pat and I have seen in a lot of our research and a lot of our other discussions. Whenever you bring these large bodies of disparate folks together, it's just like you said, David, that's when the disease starts setting in. And how long is that going to last? How is this going to really affect the siege operations around Boston with disease and whatnot?
Well, camp fever is a constant. Dysentery, typhus, it's hard to tell. It might even be malaria. It's a whole mix of things, but they're swapping it around. And
of course.
But there was no devastating outbreak, like plague in the London years. London in the plague years. It was nothing like that. So you could, there could have been something that set in that killed 10, 15%. Didn't happen. But the attrition by sickness is constant. But the big one, that didn't happen. That would have been, kind of a game ender.
Right.
Maybe for both sides. It's hard to say what was going on. And at the same time that all this, there are rumors of reinforcement troops from Ireland. Turn out to be true. There are Irish troops now coming into Boston, a fresh crop of generals. This is when Burgoyne and Clinton and Howe show up in Boston. So they're in Boston by June of 1775. And so the regulars are getting their command structure in order, and they're looking at it continentally. They are thinking about, where their army, they know they have a multiple front conflict ahead of them and so on. By this point, it's war. People know it. Up until then, you could pretend it was something else, but it's now pretty clear. Still a year before the Declaration of Independence, it's right. Pretty clear this is war.
So they knew at this point that it was just a war, but this wasn't just a New England thing.
Right.
Incredible. Right. So it seems like everybody's sort of having their big, most important moments of this growing up process, like right around the same time, midsummer. Like it's, you said Washington arrives kind of like right around June. You got Clinton, Burgoyne, all those guys show up right around noon. And I like talking about Burgoyne because Burgoyne's troops in surrender show up at a place where I work. So that's very exciting. So anyway,
before that, we should back up one step. Okay. Before that is Bunker Hill.
Yes. Yep. That's what we're getting ready to get at.
Bunker Hill happens before Washington gets there. And in part, this is Warren's show, although on the day, Warren is a private. He's not yet commissioned. He'd been commissioned a general. He had not yet received that commission, but he volunteered as a private on the day. So that was part of this take the hills thing. The provincials decide, let's take the hills in Charlestown. There's two hills there, Breed's Hill and Bunker Hill, and they want to take those. They are investing Roxbury, so Roxbury becomes the camp. Winter Hill is a camp, and more provincial troops are there. But they want to take Charlestown. And make the plans for that. William Prescott arranges for the battlements on the hills. This is all clandestine. They're doing this at night. British wake up in the morning, and there they are in the hills. And that's when Howe gets involved, and it's Howe who sends the troops over to break that thing up. So it was a good idea on the provincials, take those two hills, and then now you've got a down enfilade fire into the city. And, so both sides knew this was a good idea. The provincials were repelled driven out. Most of their casualties were on the retreat from actually Breed's Hill, which they'd fortified. But the casualties for the British were devastating, the worst in the entire war. They had 1,000 casualties in a day. And the worst in the whole war. That got their attention. They knew they were into something else when that happened. So that's prelude. This is before Washington is here. There's already plenty of organization there, a feint, a ploy that almost worked. It came that close. But anyway, I'm sorry, but that's prelude to what follows.
Now, I'm glad you touched on it, David. Can you actually, since we are talking about Bunker Hill, can you talk a little bit to the mythology that comes out of that fight? Because there's really a lot of patriotic, if you will, mythology for the burgeoning United States that comes out of the Battle of Bunker Hill. The don't fire till they see the whites of their eyes, all this sort of thing. How much of that is a propaganda of the time versus what we've kind of developed over the years? Particularly, we were talking about the 19th century really takes hold of the mythology of the Revolution prior to and during the centennial of the country.
Right. Well, that the whites of the eyes thing is quite true. Whether anybody actually said "don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes" that's a matter of debate. But the orders were. The provincials are very short of ammo, and that's what happened at the end of the day on Bunker Hill. They ran out of ammo. That's what happened to the regulars on their way back from Concord. They ran out of ammo. This is not good. So they're short of ammo. So the order definitely was, let them get really, really close before you fire. And there, a couple of ways to state that in military terms, and it was stated that way in military terms at the time. This, deliberate decision. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten was there another part to that?
We were talking about the mythology.
Yeah. But the other thing that as a tactic had been practiced before, and it's part of the classical literature of warfare. And another thing is I think it was Howe's reaction to Bunker Hill. One more such victory and we're undone. So this is what's known as a Pyrrhic victory. This is Pyrrhus who decided, I'm going to invade Rome, and he really made some inroads there, but was just losing. He won every battle, but lost so many troops that finally you lose the war. You can win the battles and lose the war. So Pyrrhus was literally cited. This is part of their classical education, part of their knowledge of history. So you can say it's mythology, but it's factual mythology, if there is such a thing. Sure. And of course, they all got gilded and embellished in, around 1875, but that doesn't take the shine away from this stuff. These people really knew what was going on around them. We just don't give them enough credit.
I'm really fascinated by just how quickly the British are learning the series of lessons of this is not what we expected. This is not what we expected. They're much more organized in the earlier sort of riots and protests. And, oh man, they had us on April 19th. Wow, that's pretty wild. And then it in a full battle sense, right? Breed's and Bunker Hill, they're used to winning. Sure, they got the W, but they have a fat lip and they're bleeding and they're like, nobody makes me bleed my own blood. They're not used to this. This is a really, it's just fascinating to me that they're so quickly going through this over and over again. And at what point do you take it seriously? And I guess it's around June where we were talking about when Washington shows up, because everybody's like, this is a war. These are no longer these little peasant farmers. It's a war against an army that are they viewing that as a rebellion still?
The rhetoric would be rebellion, because rebellion is not as dignified a thing to do as revolution. revolutions, political rebellion might, teenagers rebel. You know what I mean? It's definitely, you're slighting the enemy. When you call them a rebel, you're slighting them. Right. And that's part of the military. The British military's got its own rules that go back however many years you want to gauge it, 1,000, 1,500 years. They've got their own traditions, and they're tough as nails. And they involve no quarter most of the time, no regard for civilians at all, no respect for them at all. And so that's the attitude, and Gage and the other officers are pushing that attitude. It's in their letters, it's in there everywhere. And then somebody like Percy says, if you consider these country people and a walk in the park and a pushover, you're wrong. Percy's a great soldier, and he knew what he saw. And so he's one of those witnesses who's saying, don't take these people for granted. Nevertheless, this is a lesson that the British regulars are going to have to learn over and over again in the colonial war in America. And boy, didn't they have to learn it again in every other colonial war they ever fought in. This, it's part of colonization to be dismissive, and the people who were there are less than nothing. That's got to be the attitude for the colonizer. And so when they turn back, when they turn on you and bite, bit of a surprise. So that continues to go on. But in the very beginning, at these moments, that's when these revelations are happening. That's when the minds start to change. It has to be. Interesting. To one of those interesting times, you're glad you weren't there.
Right.
Real quick. So the one last thing with Bunker Hill. I was fascinated that Joseph Warren volunteers as a private. Now my brain is like, what do we call him here? Because he's got the commission, hasn't received it yet, so he should be General Warren. He's technically, you said he volunteered, so that would make him Private Warren, but he's a doctor. Does being a doctor supersede being a private? Is he Dr. Private Warren? No,
he is a physician. But his higher post is that he is chair of the Committee of Safety. Okay. The Committee of Safety is the military arm of the Provincial Congress. So he is kind of overall command in the field, but
how does he end up volunteering as a private?
Just because his commission hadn't come through and he wanted to be there.
So is he on the front line in formation with so he's not a private, but like still on a horse doing his thing with all the other command staff. So he's actually out there getting shot at.
He's armed. He's shooting and getting shot at. Yep.
My goodness. All right. So I just was fascinated with the guy that, is like in charge of things down on the very front line.
Hey, this is America, man.
Yeah, no, you're right.
That's true.
I'm struggling not to make every America joke I can. Like every time we say something, I'm like, yeah. So I'm trying to be a grown up here, guys. Sorry.
Yeah, no, Warren is one of those people that you never tire of learning more about. Really quite extreme, like Paul Revere. You hear Paul Revere stories, you go, that just can't be true. It is. He was all that.
All right. Well, we just sat down with Patrick Calloway, who's a doctoral student at UMaine, talking about the Penobscot expedition. So we just spent a lot of time looking at Paul Revere, cutting on him a bit, but giving him a break a bit. We felt being historically fair, shooting a little bit, but he didn't really want to be there anyway. So
he can take a punch. It's all right.
He certainly can. So, Matt, moving on, did you have anything about Bunker Hill you wanted to focus on before we jump into the rest of the siege, as it were? Or?
Sure. I was curious, David, the Irish forces that show up, are their arrival what allows the people of your people? That's right.
They aren't actually Irish.
Right. Right. They're Irish based.
They were stationed in Ireland. Yeah.
Right. Are they what allows Gage to go on the offensive at Breeds and Bunker Hill, or does he do that before they
weren't
arrive?
there? No, they weren't there yet. They
Okay.
show up in June. They're not there in March.
Gotcha.
He's in a pickle because there are way more troops around him than he has even in the whole city. I think something like 5,000 maybe in the city, in Boston are in Gage's command overall. And he knew he wanted twice that number just to do April 19th. So he knew he's and what happened on the day just underscores that. Now, 1,000 casualties. It's 20% of your whole force.
Right.
That's awful. That is awful. And that's what he's facing.
It's so mind-numbing to me that we're what's the word I'm looking for? We're like retrograding as far as like our casual. We just spent a lot of time talking about the First World War, and we're like, my brain was like, oh, only 1,000 casualties, but like that's a huge number in the context of the American Revolution.
Yeah,
it is. When you look at like regiment, well, company by company in the First World War, some unfortunate companies you see 80% killed.
Right.
In some engagements, but generally the worst is somewhere around 10% killed and wounded, between 10 and 20% killed and wounded. Devastating. And those are actually the numbers that we're seeing. If Captain Parker's company, 8 out of their 60 killed. Big number. So you're right. When you translate, we are talking about thousands. Not millions. You're talking about millions in the First World War. But if you know Pinker's curve,
Yep.
I don't. Can we get a lesson?
On another occasion.
Okay.
I'll tell you about it sometime.
All right.
Yeah, but even those horrible numbers in World War II don't make a bump on Pinker's curve. Anyway, that is definitely a different matter.
You got to tell me about that when we're done. I want to know about.
I can do that.
But that is what we're talking about. These are Civil War type numbers, World War I type numbers. That's what they're experiencing in 1775, and it's new for the regulars. This is new. Nobody, like you said, nobody does this to us. We're the British Army. So,
what is the reaction in London?
Well, delayed, of course.
Sure.
But it's on both sides. There are those who are saying, "We told you, don't do this. Get out of there." And then there are those who are saying, "Who are these people? Crush them like flies." So that that continues. That's what Parliament's doing for a living until 1783. And it becomes a global conflict. France gets involved.
Spain gets involved. Yeah.
So that's what London is dealing with. And this stuff that we're talking about, they don't hear about. And maybe they never hear about because it's so small scale. But here's where our interest lies, I think, in this medium, this podcast medium, this kind of granular examination, perfectly appropriate. And yet now you'd never heard about it. And if they heard about it, they say, well, so what? A poor widow in tears? So what? This is war,
Right.
Yeah.
C'est la guerre. So I just always like to put things in context. And so just so we keep on brand with things. Up until this becomes an international conflict with France and Spain getting involved, this is a relatively small happening in the British overall scheme of the world. I mean, it's getting bigger and bigger. It's like an itch that's becoming very annoying. And then like suddenly the French show up and you're like, this is a rash and we need to deal with it now. So just for context, over there, I say like, what's London's reaction? And my initial expectation was London's going to be freaking out. We had these crazy casualties and all this. And there is some of that, but there's also a lot of not of that because this isn't the be all and end all of everything in London society at the time. I got fancy. For those of you who can't see me, I turned my body sideways in a very fancy manner. All right. So let's move along here. So George Washington shows up on the other side in Boston. Howe, Clinton, Gage, Burgoyne. They're really
they're getting reinforced.
Yeah, they're getting really reinforced. Remember, the ports are open, so we're settling into a true siege. We talked about a period where the loyalists who were outside wanted in, and they were allowed in, and those who wanted to be out were allowed to get out. There's a small amount of commerce happening, so it's not a straight up siege where it's like you're choked off entirely. My understanding is there's a small, road commerce that's taking place, but everybody's gearing up for this war. Now, is it hot fighting the entire time, or is it basically a long build up to how this story inevitably ends? I don't want to give it away just yet, but sort of what happens from June.
There's gunfire every day.
Okay.
If you're in and around Boston, you're used to the sound of gunfire.
So how do you get us then from sort of everybody's here, everybody's set up, to when this, winds down in March of 1776, the year of independence? Not, a few months short of it, but, how do we get from, midsummer of 75 to March of 76?
Isn't it June? Isn't the evacuation June?
Did I say March? I thought it was.
I might have said, March is Bunker Hill.
Real time fact checking.
I believe it is June, but yeah, we were talking about March earlier, and that's what threw things.
Right, and the
March 17th.
It's June 17th.
Oh, March 17th.
March 17th, and evacuation day is
on March 15th. Winds became favorable on March.
That's
17th.
Right. Yeah. Bunker Hill's March 5th, 75. No, it isn't.
But this, according to the cheap Wikipedia, it says March 17th, 1776 is when the British begin to get underway. So St. Patrick's Day,
right.
76, baby.
Yeah. Evacuation day. So from June, when Washington takes command, there's a bit of back and forth, and as I said, there's gunfire every day. It's mostly ineffectual, but every now and again, the provincials would throw like an 18-pound ball into Boston. So they've got this little warning, and there's firing coming from Roxbury, but no big, after Bunker Hill, no big organized attempt on the regulars to break out, no organized attempt on the provincials to break in. So it is siege. Supplies are still very, very iffy, and cost of everything's going up. Cost of wood goes up just unbelievably, and but meanwhile, so that's going on. But meanwhile, there's still those guns out in Fort Ty, and Arnold is still there. Allen is still there. And we're getting into, summer goes by, nothing happens. They're talking about bringing them back, but it doesn't happen. Henry Knox in Boston proposes to Washington that Henry Knox, could go out there and pick up these cannon. They are still in control of the provincials, but there are fears of British regular troops coming from Canada to take the guns back. Basically, the forts aren't terribly useful at that point, but the guns are. So that's the game. That's the chase. And so Knox heads out there, but he doesn't get out there till November. Right. So, we're going to have to leave the siege. I think the horrible part of the siege is from, is 4 months, 5, 6 months, and there is a bit of stasis to it. But this other thing is going on now. So the guns don't get picked up until November, and then they start heading their way back. And you've got all that trip is this epic voyage with the ice breaking under the cannon and so on. These are 59 cannon. I've got 60 tons of ordnance that they're moving on wagons. Quite an operation. But we don't see the payoff until January of 76, if we can, elide over that interim.
Yeah.
And then it's March of 76 so the cannon are dispositive. They make the difference.
Okay.
When they get to Boston, that changes.
Yeah, the British are like crap.
What's going on? Yeah. And then there are little dramas inside there of investing the hills of Dorchester.
And I'm
midnight operation. It's got everything. It's just amazing. And that is the moment where you wake up and you look out and you see the mouths of the cannon looking at you from Dorchester Heights. That's it. Now you go.
And I'm glad you touched on Dorchester Heights, because that is an aspect of it that I am familiar with, kind of the end game, if you will, for the siege of Boston. Yeah. Would you care to elaborate a little bit on that midnight operation? We've got a few minutes, but not too much time left.
Yeah. Well, I can't really carry it too much further forward than that, but it's got many aspects of great adventure to it. But it's a matter of, it's never a matter of crossing lines. So it's not that sort of battle. It's at this moment, it's still a little more clandestine. They came around the back door to get them up on the heights in Dorchester, but they're also in Leechmere at Phipps Farm. They're a cannon at Phipps Farm, and between the two of them, they're doing a pretty good job of covering Boston.
All right.
So I'm sorry, I don't know the personae of the of the affair of Dorchester Heights.
So before we wind down here, I had a great image in my head of Henry Knox, basically, Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold. The reason the guns really aren't moving is because they've just been arguing about who's in charge the entire time. And Henry Knox is in Boston like, I could just go get those while they're arguing. And no, it's not what happens. But it's the image in my head.
Not far off.
I'm sure. There's always a tinge of truth to the humor in history. How many of the guns, do you know offhand, how many of the guns actually make it back from Fort Ticonderoga? Did they successfully get them all?
All of them. Yeah. A couple of them broke through the ice, but they got them out.
That's incredible. Yeah.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And the, that procession also, the people along the way saw it go by and knew what that meant.
It's on now, baby. Let's go. That's the first time we ever heard the chant, USA, USA.
Pretty sure it's not.
You know what anachronism means?
Yeah. So, all right. So I'm going to toss the last word to you. So we get to March. The British, I guess, have made the decision to evacuate Boston. We know that they're not going to press out into the established Continental line now, and the Continentals don't really have an interest in pressing down on the British in the city. So the British leave. So I'll toss it to you with this. What is A, how does this wrap up go in Boston? And B, what does this mean for the overall picture of the revolution, since this cycle of episodes ends with sort of the door opening to the greater conflict? I'll toss it to you to sort of set all that up.
Well, that's almost the end of the armed conflict in Massachusetts. There's always a couple of exceptions, and then and there are coastal things going on. So in Connecticut, Rhode Island, but never again is Boston, Lexington, Concord. They're not involved. There's no hot fire in those locations any longer for the balance of the war. And this other structure is growing up, which is the political structure that emerges from the Committee of Safety, Committee of Correspondence, Again, Gage has. There's no council. It's going to be a while before that political structure gets put back. There's no governor until John Hancock. It's that stuff is in the future. There are matters to address, like what do we do with the loyalists? What do we do about supplies? Arms, getting the arms into the army. That means you take them from the towns. Then you have to resupply the town militias with arms. In part, that's what the French arms are doing. The French arms come in later in the 70s, and that changes it. And they come into Boston, but there's no firing involved at that point. So basically, the hot firing leaves with the regulars in March of 1776. The theater now is elsewhere, particularly New York. But in fairly short order, Maryland.
Yep, comes down here. One interjecting question: where do the British go when they immediately leave Boston? Do they go to another one of the colonies in the Americas, or are they?
They're going to New York, right?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I just wanted to set that up for our listeners because I know that we're going to get that one comment, that one email. It's like, well, where do the British go?
Who's in New York waiting for them?
George freaking Washington. No. I got that one wrong.
John Singleton Copley. So he paints all their portraits.
Oh, very fancy. It's a good thing we got our butts kicked. Got a time for a fancy portrait, Matt? Yes. So last thing is, I'll ask you this: is it revolution time? Like, even though the Declaration doesn't come until July, but with the British leaving Boston, the theater shifting to New York and eventually further south, like if it's not outright fever pitch yet, but is the mojo for revolution and independence getting going now?
Yeah, I'd say. I mean, you just examine, if you're the Continental Congress and you examine that string of events, it's time to draft a Declaration of Independence. It's a year late, maybe, but the mills of government grind slow. So,
oh yes, even today still. So, all right, well, Mr. David Wood, we thank you for your time. Make sure that if you are regional to the Concord, anywhere in New England, I imagine New England is as big as a baseball glove, a Boston Red Sox baseball glove. Go Yankees! But what you guys want to do is get out to the Concord Museum. They got a bunch of new exhibits opening up. We'll have you back sometime in the future, Mr. Wood, to talk about something else that relates to the museum. We had an immensely fun time chatting with you, learning. This was probably my best experience ever engaging in the subject matter around Boston.
Oh, nice to hear.
Go Yankees! Like I just come back to that. So thank you for spending your afternoon with us, and we'll catch you again sometime. Thank you.
Okay, take care.
All right. Well, before we get out of here completely for the day and for quarter two and the American Revolution for now, Matt, I know that you wanted to focus a little bit on sort of the action that takes place on Dorchester Heights. It's so some of the, I guess, in a historically conversational way, some of the fun stuff that takes place during the siege of Boston. Matt, go ahead and tell our listeners sort of the ins and outs as lightly as we can of what happens on Dorchester Heights during the siege.
Sure. As David said, this is going to be the climax of the siege. This is what will break the siege. And what's going to happen is that those 59 guns from Henry Knox have made it to the Boston area, but now we've got to place them. And where are we going to place them? Just like has been said, on those heights. Right. Yep, on those hills.
Right.
Anywhere where they can be the most effective. And the Dorchester Heights are pretty much the last high ground that can really be utilized. And on the 4th of March, 1776, they're going to begin to drag guns up Dorchester Heights.
The big ones that Henry Knox went and got from Fort Ticonderoga.
Correct. Not all of them, because they're going into positions all over around Boston Harbor, but
a number of
them are going to be dragged up Dorchester Heights. And
do we know what size guns these are?
Off the top of my head, I do not.
I know we said heavy artillery, but like my brain is thinking like Civil War era heavy artillery, and I know that those are rail car based, and we're not with that technology. So
correct. I'm there are 18 pounders and things of that nature, but I don't know the specific poundage of the rounds being utilized here.
Just for some context, I do know that General Gage has guns pointing out of Boston that some of them are 24-pound guns. So maybe we're talking about those. We'll look it up. If you were out there in the masses of fact checkers who love to send us messages, you know the rules, y'all. Be nice, but we'd love to hear from you. So I just was curious about that because the artillery geek brain that I have. So
absolutely.
So some of them are being placed, here and there, but a bunch of them are coming to Dorchester Heights.
Correct, and they're actually going to sneak them up there. Okay.
What?
Yeah, you'd think it'd be difficult to sneak a bunch of cannon up on top of this high ground, but you're going to love this. They actually do wrap the wheels of these various carriages and whatnot in straw to deaden the sound.
Clandestine operations.
That's right. And they move them up there in the evening of March 4th and begin digging in that night. So at dawn on March 5th, as Gage is looking around as to this encircling colonial force, he's going to see up on Dorchester the mouths of yet another battery, another grouping of cannon.
Yeah, but this one just suddenly appeared.
Correct.
He's like, what?
Yep.
More guns?
More guns. And they're going to begin shelling or I shouldn't say shelling. They're going to begin bombarding into Boston and the immediate area they're around. And that fortification on Dorchester is only going to grow.
Are these guns out of range of the British fire?
For the most part.
So these are sort of big, long punches that can't be parried away or returned.
Right.
So so this is one of when you say this is what forces the end of the siege, sort of breaks it. This is why, because now there's a big punch being thrown that you can't do anything about.
Yeah, they can't respond to it. Exactly. Not with even the large guns on the Royal Navy vessels that are there. The limited number of vessels can't reply because they can't bring the guns up that high.
I found it fascinating that when we were talking about the British escaping to places like New York, some of them go up to Halifax, which I found interesting because of the connection just to the, when we told the Penobscot story, the large contingent of the British there evacuate to Halifax. And I think that's just a little connecting of the dots, how I like to do that there. So from General Gage's perspective, when I say that they just appear, how do they mask the construction of this? Just how do you do that? I know that we're packing. First of all, you know how expensive straw's getting? Didn't you hear what David said? Straw's a hot commodity, and you're just wrapping wagon wheels in it.
Right.
I mean, it's an effective gamble.
Sure. But they are going to, you're absolutely right. They are going to mask this battery, particularly as they are extending it, because obviously March 5th, Gage wakes up and guns, they're there already. But they are going to be attempts to mask the extensions of the battery using trees, using digging in behind cover and things of that nature over the next several days. And by the 17th, it is over.
Right.
Okay. So they're up there by the 5th and of course begin to expand on it. And just over a week later, the British are evacuating Boston.
War is on.
War is on.
Absolutely incredible. So thank you all for listening to the History Things podcast. This has been cycle 2, quarter 2, baby, of season 3 here. Just a reminder, we mentioned at the head of the show, go to trhistorical.com, use our promo code and get your 10%. If you want
some money.
Yeah, make sure you also support Dave out there on social media by searching for him at TR Historical. You want to follow us on social media, you can do that too. We'd appreciate it. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube by searching for the History Things podcast. If you want to follow Matty B in his solo adventures, often author Historical Magical Wonderland, book 3 coming out soon, right?
Yes. Yep.
Very excited.
Yep.
Are you excited? I'm
should be later this summer. Yeah.
I'm kind of excited.
You're only kind of.
Yeah, it's like show me something new. Oh, you are. It's not. This was the joke I was setting up for. It's not a Maryland campaign book.
Correct.
Matt, quick plug. Where are we going for book 3 in the Faces series?
One of the most one-sided Confederate victories of the war. We're going to Fredericksburg.
Woo! Also, asterisks. It could have been very different, and that's part of the lesson of Fredericksburg overall. If you want to get into it, there. Looking at you, Stonewall Jackson. Also, where were the Pennsylvania Reserves backup? I mean, they were in. You need some backup, but that's a story for a different day. So make sure you follow along with Matty B here on at Matt Borders Books. Why am I stumbling over that? Follow him at Matt Borders Books on Instagram only. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at History Things with Pat. If you want to send an email to the show here, you can do that by getting in touch with us through historythingspodcast@gmail.com. For our guest today, David Wood, curator of the Concord Museum. For my co-host with the most, Matt Borders, Matty B. I'm your co-host, Pat McGuire. You've been listening to the History Things podcast, saying we will catch you in the second half of season 3, baby. Thanks for listening. Later.
Have a good night.
You've been listening to the History Things podcast. Follow the guys on Facebook and Instagram at the History Things podcast for all the latest news and exclusives. Make sure to also follow Pat and Matt on their social medias at History Things with Pat and at Matt Borders Books. Have a question, comment, or compliment for the show? Send us an email at historythingspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show.